It would have been very simple. Hey guys, look, there's an alert here. Let's just go back.
When 14 men set out onto the muddy currents on one of Costa Rica's most famous rivers, danger was the very last thing on their minds. They had no idea that they would replay the tragic events that unfolded on this trip for the rest of their lives. This is the terror on the Naranjo River. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name's Ryan from Tragedy Tales, and here every week we cover anything tragic, such as kayaking gone wrong, alpinism gone wrong, and not to mention caving gone wrong. So if you're into those kind of things, why not consider tapping that subscribe button? But plugging aside, this week's video begins in 2018 in Miami, Florida. A man named Luis was deep in preparation for his wedding, scheduled for November the 30th. Completely unbeknownst to Luis, the groom's brother and best man-to-be, Sergio, began assembling the ultimate bachelor's party. He eventually got together 13 of Luis's closest friends, chosen mainly as they all played a part in his life. They watched each other leave high school and build families. They were as thick as thieves, and they considered each other brothers. But they wanted to push the boat out and do something extra special for Luis's bachelor party. So they soon began brainstorming ideas: a Vegas gambling extravaganza, skydiving, maybe Ibiza, but none of them really stuck until the notion of a Costa Rica Adventure Week came up. Costa Rica, known for its lush, dense rainforests, lures tourists from all over the world. It harbours an extensive and fantastic array of exotic plant and animal life, hiding pristine yellow beaches and towering volcanoes. It's also pretty famous for its water sports, zip lines, and arduous treks, truly offering something for everyone. They all agreed that this would make the most epic and unforgettable bachelor's party of all time, a statement that would later prove right for all the wrong reasons. After deciding they were going to go to Costa Rica, they approached a local Miami man named Alan. His job was to directly liaise with the excursion companies to sell trips, guides, and coach trips to Costa Rica. Alan recommended the group book with the Cupoa Expedition Company in Quepos, a town on Costa Rica's central Pacific coast. For a bit of history, the Cupoa Expedition Company opened their doors for bookings in 1996, professionally guiding river trips throughout the United States, from rivers in West Virginia to the upper Animas of Colorado. Eventually, they branched out and offered excursions in Costa Rica and Europe in 1999. But before long, they had many employees working at the center in Costa Rica. They'd routinely take groups on valley trips and rafting adventures on the nearby rivers. And over the course of 18 years they'd been open, they'd conducted hundreds of excursions, and looking at their relatively scarce history online, I can't find a single report of fatalities in their care, or any reports of safety concerns for that matter. So it seems they conducted things by the book most of the time. But back in Miami, after some deliberation, the men booked a 4-day trip, starting on October the 18th, before returning home on October the 21st. Each day they booked several activities with a handful of companies, ranging from quad bikes, zip lines, snorkeling, and long treks. And on the final day, to finish the trip with a bang, they booked a water rafting trip on the Rio Naranjo. So on October the 18th, the group of 14 best friends packed their bags and set off for a trip of a lifetime, stepping on a plane from Miami Airport to Costa Rica. Spirits were high as the plane waited for takeoff. They ordered alcohol and the party began. Around 3 hours later, the men arrived at their destination. They got into a taxi from the airport to a house that they'd rented. The following day, the men woke up ready to have fun. The weather was described as bright and sunny. It was perfect for the week that they had planned. One of the first things they did was quad biking, zipping through the mud at incredible speeds, wind through their hair. It was bliss. They were all together, enjoying each other's company, making memories to last a lifetime. And honestly, they were having the time of their lives.
When we finished the tour and we all stopped and finally sat down and took off our helmets, everybody was like, wow, what a rush.
As the days went on, they partied in the night and had the most epic adventures in the day. Until it got to the very last day, of Saturday, October the 20th. It was what everyone was looking forward to. It was time for the water rafting. The men woke up in the morning and looked outside their windows. They found that it was bright and sunny where they were staying, so they chose to wear shorts and t-shirts and excitedly left the house to make their way to the centre in Quepos. By the time they'd arrived, the weather had done a U-turn. Angry clouds rolled in, and it was now windy and spitting with rain. they began to worry that the thing they'd all been looking forward to could now be cancelled. But much to their surprise, when they got to the centre, the guides didn't mention the weather or even acknowledge the rain whatsoever. Although it had not rained where the men were staying, it had consistently rained for the past 3 days near the river. The government issued rain and flood warnings, and the centre knew of these warnings, but did not alert any of the participants. At the centre, they were sped through the basics and equipped with helmets, non-inflatable life jackets, and paddles. They then were forced to sign a waiver to say that the centre would not be responsible for any injuries or fatalities, and they got a brief 5-minute safety briefing, pretty much as short as they come. And before they knew it, they were on their way rafting. The 14 men were accompanied by 5 guides from the centre. As a group, they trekked on foot through the dense jungle to the river. After an hour or so, they finally reached the top of the river. The men stood by the water, filled with suspense and anticipation. Here they began inflating their rafts, preparing to set off. But something was wrong. The guides checked the river water level and saw that it was slightly higher than it should be, so they decided to wait a while and to see if it would drop. Less than an hour later, around 3 PM, the river water dropped slightly and they got the all clear to head out onto the river. The men split into 3 groups and hopped onto their rafts, each accompanied by a guide, with 2 additional guides in their own kayaks. Elated and eager to get going, they hopped onto their rafts and pushed themselves into the muddy, violent currents. This video was taken just moments before they pushed off. You can see in the background how aggressive the river already was. They had no idea that in just 5 minutes, this fun trip would turn into the stuff of nightmares. To make it a bit clearer for you to understand, from the takeoff point, you could only see one section of the river. But 2 minutes in, there was a steep right bank. And it was only after they turned that corner that the men truly understood what they'd signed up for. As they turned that corner, instantly, the guides knew something was wrong. The river looked furious. The current was just too strong. They began being thrashed about like ragdolls. They quickly found that they had no control on where the raft was going. Fun turned to survival as the men struggled to keep control of their rafts. They began to wonder if it was even supposed to be this strong. None of them had been water rafting before. Had they made a mistake by trusting this company? But the strength of the water below them only grew stronger and stronger. Within 2 minutes of turning the corner, the men heard a heart-stopping rumbling sound behind them. Their hairs stood on end. They carefully glanced over their shoulders to see a wall of raging water coming their way. They chose the wrong time to embark on this journey. It came racing down the river and there was no way to outpace it. It hit the group and the rafts began taking in water. Almost instantly, it built up in the centre of the raft and they began folding in on themselves, ejecting all of their occupants into the frigid water. In just 5 minutes, the 3 rafts had now fully capsized. All 14 men were now careening down the river at a breakneck pace, twisting and turning, just trying to catch their breath. Survival was the only thing they could focus on. Everyone frantically waved their arms in the water, trying to hold on to something, anything, but there was nothing. They were forced to take deep breaths and pray as they hopelessly hurtled through the immense violent currents, ricocheting off the jagged rocks before pushing on the riverbed with their feet to take a breath. The guides in the kayaks began rescue attempts. One of the guides tried to pull one of the men onto his kayak, but the waters were so vicious, it caused him to capsize, throwing him into the same predicament. Those still holding onto their rafts struggled to turn them over, and one was successful. Luis, the groom-to-be, and his brother Sergio managed to climb back on the raft. They knew that they needed to stick together, so they held onto each other's life jackets for dear life, all while trying to stabilize the raft. But sadly, they didn't stand a chance. It was just seconds later before it capsized again, throwing both men back into the water, separating them for good. They tried, but eventually gave up trying to get onto the rafts. The men began making their way to the side of the stream to hold onto rocks. Here they held and prayed that they would be rescued. Now there isn't much detail on what happened next, but I can only imagine what these guys must have been going through. Holding onto rocks in a raging current, not actually knowing if rescue was coming, not knowing if they were going to make it out alive. Just a terrible situation to find yourself in. Only when the group did not return did the centre raise the alarm. Rescue helicopters, boats, and 12 rescue workers from the centre arrived at the mouth of the river to assist, but here they only found 3 empty rafts and an empty kayak. They instantly knew that something terrible had happened. Rescue boats meticulously swept along the still raging river for hours, while helicopters searched in the air. When all of a sudden, they noticed heads struggling to stay afloat in the water. Rescue rushed to their aid and helped them out of the water. They were shivering and in total shock. Knowing what he had just been through, one survivor acknowledged that there was a slim chance they were all walking out of this. They were all scattered apart in the river, and around 6 p.m, they stopped finding any survivors. They did a head count, and out of the 19 that entered the river that day, only 14 were found. A tour guide and 4 group members, including Luis's brother, was still missing. Survivors were told to return home while helicopters and boats combed through the river. The men returned to their rented home and anxiously waited by the phone. The wait must have been terrible. After hours of waiting, at 9 p.m, the phone suddenly rang. Luis answered, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing. His brother, Sergio Lorenzo, and 3 dear friends, Ernesto Sierra, Andres Dennis, and George Caso, had died. They had all drowned. They were due to fly back the next morning. The guide who also attempted to help also perished. An absolute tragedy. But the worst was still to come, contacting their families to relay the terrible news. Ernesto was just 25 years old and an only child. Andres Dennis was described as a friend to all and a week away from proposing to his girlfriend. The affected families soon got in touch with the American embassy so they could escort their bodies home. They were absolutely furious and demanding answers. When you go out on these expeditions, you do half expect the company to perform the relevant safety checks, so why weren't they made aware of the flood warnings? And why were they allowed to raft in unsafe conditions? A GoFundMe was set up with a $50,000 goal to help the victims. The families of the dead blamed and condemned the company that held the excursion, requesting rules to be tightened so that no one else has to go through what they had to. They also set on suing the ever-living daylights out of them. The police immediately seized excursions to the centre and raided their offices. Questions arose about their credibility, and many wondered why they chose to go out on the river that day, despite the rain and the warnings. For this reason, no other water groups were out in the area that day. The centre did not respond when questioned about the incident and awaited their day in court. However, after the searches, the police found they held all the suitable licenses, so the investigation was ended there. They put it down to a misadventure, and the police sought no criminal charges. In Costa Rica, there is no specific offence for corporate manslaughter for which corporate bodies can be held accountable, so the families had to go about it another way. In March 2020, the families of the victims sought justice for their loved ones. They held 2 guides with the surnames of Martinez, 26 and 28 years old responsible, along with the owner of the Quilpoa expeditions, Pessoa Calvo, 45. The case got delayed and delayed until finally, on the 5th of July 2021, the trio attended the courts of San Jose, capital of Costa Rica, accused of danger of shipwreck and 4 counts of culpable homicide. Weirdly, the man who recommended the trip in Miami, Alan, was also accused of 4 counts of simple homicide. The prosecutors requested the court give a sentence of 15 years in prison for the accused. The prosecutors contended that the 3 men were aware of the weather conditions, making the rafting on the river very risky, but they still chose to do so. The penalty for causing a shipwreck: imprisonment for 2 to 6 years for someone that knowingly executes any act that endangers the safety of a ship, and the punishment can range to up to 18 years. According to the prosecutors, one of the guides was actually situated on the raft to rescue people if anything went wrong. However, the prosecutors said that they had evidence that during the accident, 2 other tourists asked for help and he refused to help them. Instead, they were forced to swim to the shore to save their lives. Due to this, one of the guides were also charged with the crime of omission of aid. The company's owner, Pessoa Calvo, vigorously defended himself and his guides in court. He said that water rafting is a dangerous sport. They explained that any trips could go wrong at any moment, and insisted that unpredictable weather conditions generated the flash flood and water current. He actually testified that it was only thanks to the action of the guides that the tragedy was not more significant, since they saved many of those who fell into the water, and even one of the guides, Kevin Thompson, died trying to rescue them. After some deliberation, on September the 21st at 1:30 p.m, to the detriment of the survivors of the tragedy, the Capos Criminal Court's 3 judges unanimously found the owner and 2 tour guides not guilty and acquitted the accused of danger of shipwreck and the 4 crimes of culpable homicide. The court absolved them of all punishment and responsibility in the application of dubio pro reo, that the defendant may not be convicted by the court where doubts about their guilt still remain. The person who recommended the trip was of course also not found guilty. He was just simply providing a service by recommending the tour and had no part to play in the trip itself. The judges in charge ordered the immediate termination of the precautionary measures that weighed against the company and the 2 guides. In Costa Rica, the victims' families can ask the court for compensation, so they did so, and they were actually denied without merit, essentially saying that the negligent behaviour was non-existent. The families felt that they had been let down. The GoFundMe eventually went on to make $80,000 of their $50,000 goal. This was split between the victims' families. Quapoa Expeditions continues to run tours on the Naranjo River and others to this day, continuing tours in Europe and America. But this was just a tragedy. Nobody came out on top. But I'm interested as to what you guys think. Was the tour company wrong for taking them out on that day? Should the families have received their compensation? Do you believe they should have even gone out that day? I'm interested as to all of your thoughts. Personally, this story will make me think twice about signing any waiver if I was to do any sort of adventure like this, because you never know when it will all go wrong. But that is the end of the video. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, but I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.